Cloud Strife is a protagonist of Final Fantasy VII, and more than most Final Fantasy protagonists, he is defined by his relationship with his primary villain, who is Sephiroth. Of the two, Cloud is skinnier, shorter, and younger, although we have to rely on the concept art more than the in-game models to tell us so. He's got those raw metal studs on his shoulder guard and bangle, he wears large, heavy, chunky boots and textured fabrics, and it all gives the impression of someone who is thoroughly rough around the edges. Compare with the sleekness of Sephiroth's gear, and Cloud looks decidedly more unrefined, more of a grunt. Even the Buster Sword, iconic though it is rough-hewn and utilitarian, hardly an elegant weapon. It's almost more of a blunt instrument, especially compared to Sephiroth's Masamune. Still though, Cloud has the hair, that bright, spiky, wild mess, which almost contradicts his character's stoicism a little bit. It feels wilder and more passionate than his personality is willing to let on. And again, it contrasts with Sephiroth's long, hanging, and flowing hairstyle. It's a basic trope making the hero and the villain contrast with each other, but Final Fantasy VII is very much a game about identity, and Cloud's appearance versus who he really is central to his relationship with Sephiroth. Tifa Lockhart, secondary protagonist of Final Fantasy VII, acts in the narrative largely as a counterbalance to the influence of Sephiroth on Cloud. Being his childhood friend, she's connected to his innocence, his memories, and his authentic sense of self, all of which are critically important to the story. Which might also be part of the reason, besides the obvious, why she's so busty. It's a common, albeit slightly cringeworthy way to make a female character look maternal, nurturing, caretaking, and so on. Her long, straight black hair also connects to those visual tropes. It's simple, humble, associated with modesty, femininity, and again, innocence. But the design does have some interesting contrasts going on as well. Like, yes, she's the childhood friend representing innocence, but also she's going to beat you to death with those brick-heavy combat gloves and metal-strapped boots. Similarly, her long bare legs and miniskirt are, yes, a feature that's meant to sexualize and make her attractive, but it also emphasizes her agility and speed, and visually steers her away from simple, pure-hearted innocence towards something that is more modern and urbane, and in the context of the 90s, liberated and self-confident. And that matters to her role in the story, especially when it's put up against how Sephiroth treats women. Aerith Gainsborough is the tertiary protagonist of Final Fantasy VII and one of the most interesting female characters in Final Fantasy history, in my opinion, although here we'll mostly talk about her character design. Aerith is in some ways the competing love interest to Tifa, except not really, but again, that's a different video, but she is designed in part to contrast her. Her hairstyle is more elaborate, she wears pink and red where Tifa wears black and white, and Tifa's design emphasizes physical violence and agility where Aerith looks more like a spellcaster, and so on. She also interacts with Sephiroth's design a little bit. They share the same hair bangs and eye color, but Aerith represents the authentic version of what it means to be a Cetra, an ancient, a lineage and identity which Sephiroth claims falsely, like a parasite. Aerith is on the surface designed to be quite modest and traditionally feminine, but I've always found that the bright red crop top jacket with the sharp shoulders and metal rims is a nice contrast to that. It's modern for the 90s and loud, and along with the way her dress is deliberately unbuttoned to let her run and move more freely, you get the sense of a character who isn't just the placid, submissive, spiritual white mage RPG archetype, but passionate and free-spirited and confident, someone who, unlike Cloud, knows exactly who she is. Sephiroth is the main villain of Final Fantasy VII, except not really, but that's a different video, and more than most Final Fantasy villains, he's defined by his relationship to his heroic counterpart, Cloud. Of the two, Sephiroth is taller, more muscular, and older, where Cloud's design is rough, asymmetrical, and utilitarian. Sephiroth is sleek, symmetrical, and much more beautiful. He wears fine leather, smooth, high-quality armor, and of course he has the ridiculously long, sleek katana, which contrasts with the Buster Sword. The katana, by the way, I don't think is an accidental choice for him, given Shinra's similarity to a Saibatsu and the Japanese cultural history around Final Fantasy VII. The fact that Sephiroth is visually associated with the samurai seems, to me at least, meaningful. Where Cloud is young, impetuous, and energetic with his spiky hair and firm gaze, Sephiroth, by contrast, is languid, flowing, and seems more tired, especially in his portrait art, like someone who has seen too much or been through too many things without a rest. And indeed, Sephiroth does reveal himself to be profoundly broken and traumatized as the game goes on. He and Cloud reflect each other. They are contrasting responses to many of the same traumas. Sephiroth always looks more powerful, but as we learn, he is in fact vulnerable, lonely, and weak, and it terrifies him. Barret is arguably the most important supporting character in Final Fantasy VII, with his arc forming a lot of the thematic underpinning of the game. His past as a coal miner who saw his community brutalized in the name of ever more destructive energy extraction is a key part of the game's environmentalist themes, and it is his decisions that set the plot of the game into motion. His rough coat with the sleeves torn off and the dog tags around his neck imply a kind of guerrilla militarism that fits him quite well, and while his gun arm is the only explicitly mechanical part of him, he also wears these metal rings around his midriff and waist that almost look like you could unscrew his parts from one another. It's a rough, brutalist, and hard exterior, and it matches Barret's occasionally performative, hard-edged personality, which hides his soft heart that is the real core of his character. And the remake does something quite clever with that, giving him a pair of sharp black sunglasses which he wears whenever he needs to do violence or be the radical leader of Avalanche. But underneath them, he has the softest, most human eyes and very gentle expressions, often struggling to hide his emotionality. A lot of credit goes to the animators for that one, of course, but it's such a brilliant little way of showing in his design that his radical brutality is a tool, a persona that he puts on, and not the whole of his nature. Red 13, or his proper name Nanaki, is an interesting character in the Final Fantasy VII party lineup because, being an animal, his role is kind of that of an ambassador for the planet, for the natural world. Cosmo Canyon and Nanaki are both designed with what you might call Pan-American indigenous aesthetics, tying into how Final Fantasy VII positions indigeneity in connection to the land in opposition to Shinra and Midgar, which is literally a city raised away from the land on stilts. With his anatomy somewhere halfway between a big cat and a wolf, Nanaki also brings to mind lion dog statues, which in East Asia are commonly used as spiritual guardians of significant places, further cementing him as a representation of the spiritual and animalistic, as opposed to the industrial aesthetics of someone like Cloud and Barret. The clever trick that Final Fantasy VII pulls, though, is that for all his quiet, introspective reservation and connection to the spiritual, Nanaki is, in his species terms, barely more than a teenager, immature, inexperienced, uncertain, and conflicted. And so he also gets to join in on Final Fantasy VII's overarching theme of identity as he finds himself on the journey to defeat Sephiroth. As a kid, I always thought Red 13 was by far the coolest character design in the party, and as an adult, I still kinda do. Cait Sith is the weird character, the joke, the one with the RNG mechanics whose limit break can kill the entire party, causing a game over. But that's a power set that works quite well with his origins, because he's derived from the Scottish and Irish folklore creature the Ketshi, a black cat said to possess magic powers, be a witch in disguise, in which can steal the souls of the dead. And he's a deceptively clever design because, spoiler alert, Cait Sith is actually a spy, a robot controlled by Shinra, and his ridiculous appearance as a cat riding a chonky stuffed Moogle is calculated specifically to be disarming, to be too goofy, to be malicious. That works quite well with the Ketshi myth of the cat being a transformed witch in disguise, and the connection to fairy creatures also works with his habit of performing fortune-tellings that keep coming curiously and circuitously true. On top of that, there's the interesting tension that Reeve, who pilots him, ends up betraying Shinra for Avalanche in a curious case of the mask changing the wearer as well. He's a trickster character, in short, a character whose comedy and cuteness is used to keep him sympathetic despite the betrayals he engages in, and while as a kid, I always just find him kind of annoying and useless, as an adult, I appreciate him a lot more. I think the game needs his weirdness. Officially, Cid Highwind is only 32 in Final Fantasy VII, but LMAO, no he's not, this man is not a day under 45, look at him. And being kinda old is important to Cid as a character. His whole deal is that he's a cynical old bastard who lost out on his dreams and decided to make it everyone else's problem. His role in the game's story is in part about the overcoming of cynicism by connecting with empathy and hope and learning to care for the future, which is all the more reason why it was annoying when Advent children decided to visibly de-age him. Anyway, Cid's whole thing is that he's perpetually incapable of letting go of his past, and to wit, he walks around constantly in his old flight jacket and goggles, complete with that dashing old-timey pilot scarf. It's an outfit that would make him look heroic if not for his unshaved beard, ratty cigarettes, and the bandage on his brow. Combine that with his constant scowling and the way that he chews the ends of those cigarette filters, and yeah, this is a good design for a grumpy old curmudgeon, someone who both holds on to their glorious imaginary past and who's burdened and embittered by it. He's a pilot who lost the sky, who lost his dreams, and who needs to learn to fly again, and his design does a great job of showing that visually. As a design, Yuffie is a charming mix of pop culture ninja aesthetics on the one hand, with a mesh netting, headband, and shuriken, and something more decidedly modern and urban, at least for the 90s, with the leg warmers, short shorts, and crop top turtleneck sweater. I always liked her armored gauntlet too, as it introduces an unbalanced asymmetry into her design, which I think suits her personality quite well. Because Yuffie is a scrappy little tomboy, you see, often playing up or pretending to be more goofy and harmless than she is, in order to get people to lower their guards so she can steal from them. She's actually an angry teenager underneath it all, deeply resentful of her father's surrender to Shinra, but also searching for her own identity and trying to find a way to self-actualize, which does tie her into Final Fantasy VII's themes of personal identity. Being an entirely optional character, though, Yuffie is ultimately inessential to the story of the game. She mostly connects to Wutai, a Chinese-themed region which was brutalized by the Shinra Saibatsu, and that in turn connects to some of the underlying themes about imperialism and the echoes of Japanese history that Final Fantasy VII is playing with, even if I think Wutai is a badly underdeveloped part of the original game. The remake seems to be trying to do more with Yuffie's character, but what exactly they're going for remains to be seen. Ah, Vincent Valentine. Now, don't lie, if you played this game at a formative age, you either thought Vincent was the coolest motherfucker in the game, or you had a huge crush on him, because say what you will, this broody, moody edgelord is a striking character. Being optional, Vincent's narrative is ultimately a little underdeveloped in the original game. He's a former Shinra agent who got betrayed, experimented on, and filled up with angry monster juice, and so he joins the party to find some meaning in it all. He relates to the Final Fantasy VII theme of identity in this way, as his struggle is largely about reconciling with his failures and his fear of being an irredeemable monster, and that reflects nicely off of Cloud's and Sephiroth's theme. Later renditions of Vincent make him sleek and anime cool, but I always like the sloppiness of his original design. He wears this unbuckled coat over an old uniform and a chunky red bandana around his head. It's wrapped carelessly with his messy hair poking out of it everywhere, and it gives him the look of someone who's hastily trying to cover himself up, someone who's given up taking care of himself, and his claw hand and his red and black color scheme makes him look angry and violent. Vincent is, in other words, a mess, and that, more than the anime edgelord coolness, is what I think makes him interesting. Zack Fair is, or rather he was, the man that Cloud Strife couldn't be. Now, his role was massively expanded with the extended Final Fantasy VII universe, but we will focus on the original game where he is, deliberately, not that much of a character. In no small part, this is because, spoiler alert, Cloud has stolen his identity and is actively repressing all memory of Zack himself. Facing a total breakdown of his own personality and sense of self, Cloud assembles his tough guy, no feelings soldier persona based on a mishmash of Zack and Sephiroth. Cloud's affected personality is all dour, brooding, I don't care about the planet, kind of cringe tough guy posturing, but Zack wasn't like that at all. Even in the original, he was a fairly cheerful, goofy guy with a kind heart and clearly good social skills, and this is the point of him. Zack is just a normal guy who seems to have himself together, but that is why Cloud fixates on him. Zack has all of the easy masculine confidence and charm and achievement that Cloud always wished that he could have, and so Cloud projects onto Zack his own frustrated dreams of the man that he wished he could be. He mixes that with a lot of Sephiroth's distant, morose brooding, and thus he forms the fake Cloud Strife personality that he desperately tries and fails to live up to for most of the game. As a design, therefore, Zack is on purpose really kind of nothing special in the original game. He has a little bit of anime protagonist hair, granted, but beyond that, he's really just a soldier wearing the normal soldier uniform, nice and proper. Even Cloud's base design is more scrappy and modified and unique than Zack's is, but that's the point. Zack is just a guy. A normal guy with a family waiting for him in Gongaga and a girl waiting for him in Midgar, who got assigned to the wrong job at the wrong time and died a hero because he followed his heart. And that is what saves the world, because that's the lesson that Cloud finally learns from his memory. Zack was just a guy, really nothing special. He was a hero because he cared about other people. Sephiroth was the one who was special, who needed to be special, who needed to have a grand chosen one destiny written for him in the stars. Cloud becomes a hero when he accepts that he is just a guy who's standing up to Sephiroth because he cares about other people, because that's what his heart tells him. At the end of the game, ironically, Cloud becomes much more like Zack by being himself than he ever was when he was pretending to be him. President Shinra is the main villain of Final Fantasy VII. For a couple of hours. Well, at least in the original, he is. The remake doesn't even pretend that it's not Sephiroth. In the original game and in the remake, Shinra is very much a stereotype as a character design. He's a corpulent, middle-aged, cigar-chewing industrialist with a mustache and a receding hairline, the very picture of the rapacious capitalist as villain, but I repeat myself. He notably wears a bright red suit, which contrasts heavily with both the dirty sci-fi punk industrial grime of Midgar and with the sleek 90s futurism of his offices. It has a bit of an air of opulence about it, that suit, more personality than the black or navy mundanity of a standard businessman's attire. And of course, what better color to dress a man who is so steeped in blood? Shinra, of course, doesn't matter nearly as much as he thinks he does. He is a small fish who has the wrong idea about the size of the pond, and it is Jenova and her puppet Sephiroth who are the real sharks here. One thing, mind you, is that Shinra is blonde, which in Japanese media is often a kind of visual shorthand for foreigner. Of course, Cloud is blonde too, and there are crazier hair colors in the game, but it does strike me as interesting that even though the Shinra Electric Company is so strongly based on the Japanese Zaibatsu model of corporate conglomerate, its leader seems to use the design stereotypes of the Western military-industrial oligarch instead. Final Fantasy VII is steeped in turn-of-the-century meditations on the danger of extractive colonial imperialism, so maybe there's a bit of commentary in the design choices of President Shinra's character. It's hard to say for sure, but it is fun to think about. Jenova is the final boss of the original Final Fantasy VII. Yeah, sure, it's calling itself Safer Sephiroth at the time, but Sephiroth's face is little more than a front. When Sephiroth falls into the lifestream carrying Jenova with him, they are merged so completely that the distinction is meaningless. Sephiroth's grand master plan to ascend to godhood, after all, is literally just to do exactly what Jenova was doing anyway, wound the planet, consume the lifestream, and move on to a new host to eat. Sephiroth fancies himself a singular will, master of his own destiny, but all that his behavior really amounts to is the skittering of an ant infested with cordyceps and climbing to a tall branch to spread the fungus's spores. Jenova's design thus is appropriately bizarre. She's presented initially and by Shinra as a feminine humanoid creature, the mother figure that Sephiroth is so desperately searching for, but it is also a distorted and bizarre figure with eyes where they shouldn't be and organs and fleshy protrusions bubbling out where they should not sit. When you battle her, she shows up as a mixture of biological body horror and, I think, the weird bulbous shapes of fungi, especially her birth, life, and death forms, while her final appearance as Synthesis looks in part like a tick or some kind of horrid parasite swollen and fat with what it has stolen, but also very much like a kind of mutated parody of the female reproductive system, although I can't show you a direct comparison there without YouTube getting very upset with me. She is Sephiroth's mother, insofar as it is her parasitic corruption that gives birth to his final form, or rather to her final form, which will complete and continue her horrible life cycle. Sephiroth, the poor boy, was so desperate to be special, to be something celestial, that Jenova granted his wish by turning him into just another version of her. Sephiroth, of course, eventually became the main villain of Final Fantasy VII as a franchise, but in the original game, make no mistake that it is Jenova who is the power behind the throne. In the original Final Fantasy VII, you can almost argue that Professor Hojo is the biggest villain of the story. It is he who accelerates the Jenova gene splicing research at Shinra that produces Sephiroth. It is he who is responsible for the death of Aerith's parents, and he is the one who brutally experiments on Cloud and Zack, breaking Cloud's traumatized mind even further than it already was. And of course, he is Sephiroth's father, actively working to provide Sephiroth with clone bodies to control. He is, in many ways, the person whose actions most directly set the plot and the horrors of the game in motion. But that's giving Hojo too much credit, really, because what he truly is a parasite, and in this, he is like Shinra, like Jenova, and even like how Sephiroth turns out in the end, a selfish bottom feeder whose only real strength lies in taking from others. He rises to the rank of top scientist by murdering Dr. Gast and stealing his research and his child, and throughout the game, all of Hojo's scientific brilliance amounts primarily to making monsters and brainwashing people. All he really does is brutalize other people's bodies for his own benefit. As a design, then, he is your stereotypical scientist guy, dressed in a simple lab coat, collar, shirt, and slacks, entirely unremarkable in his costume. His design focuses its details on his head, especially that enormous sloping eyebrow ridge he has, which squeezes his expression down and rises to a receding hairline where his long hair is kept unmanaged and unkempt, giving a real impression of a greasy lack of personal hygiene. Emphasizing a big forehead is, of course, the world's most classic visual trope for the genius character, but that trope is twisted a bit here by distorting the eyebrow ridge instead of the forehead, and that gives him a look, in the concept art anyway, like a clay figure that got badly squeezed by its maker, a parody of the kind of brilliant scientist he imagines himself to be. The low-poly 3D models of the original game unfortunately mostly render this as just a classic egghead scientist with a big forehead, so that part of the concept art gets lost, unfortunately, but regardless, Hojo remains the very picture of a slimy, unpleasant, amoral, self-obsessed scumbag. The sort of guy who thinks a STEM degree exempts him from ethics. The sort of guy who would put rational free thinker in his social media bio. The sort of guy who really cares about Reddit karma and who replies to everything Elon Musk posts on Twitter. Rufus Shinra, the Boy King. When Jenova, wearing Sephiroth's appearance, murders his father, he shows up to declare himself CEO and monologue about how his father was too old-fashioned and I'm gonna do things a different way. I'll control the world with fear. I'm a big boy with modern ambitions. It's all a little quaint, almost, next to the apocalyptic threat of Jenova and Sephiroth, and Rufus, for the most part, plays a supporting, not a driving role in the events of the game. And ultimately, he turns out to be very much like his father, yet another rich man who thinks he has the right to own the world. He just dresses it up in slightly different language. Thus, to his character design, where President Shinra contrasts the late 90s industrial futurism of the Shinra building with his rich red suit chomping his cigar, and evokes imagery of old-timey robber barons and industrialists, Rufus dresses all in white, head to toe, and in much more of a modern for the 90s kind of fashion. More futuristic, more sci-fi, more stark, and in the remake games he goes all the way into a techwear coat complete with classic Nomura-isms like fingerless gloves and too many decorative belts. It all contributes very effectively to the image of a trust fund brat, someone with big ideas who's desperate to purge himself of his father's shadow and so taken with his own ideas of wiping the slate clean and starting something new that he fails to notice just how much he's repeating his father's megalomania in a slightly different coat of paint. Rufus is hateable on sight. Even in the original Stumpy 3D models, before he says a word, you know that this is a face that it would be satisfying to put a fist in. Ah, the Turks. Their role in the extended lore of Final Fantasy VII is massive, but in the original game, they are mostly just tertiary antagonists playing the role of company men. And company woman, I guess. Sorry, Elena. They are the men in black for Shinra, elite assassins, spies, and saboteurs, the guys who do the dirty work. But as characters, they treat this gig entirely like a 9-to-5. Thus, the game has multiple scenes of Reno, Rude, and Elena especially engaging in slice-of-life office drama, refusing to work overtime, and the more experienced men spend some time teasing the overeager rookie Elena for working too hard. They also have no real enmity with the party. Rude even has a little crush on Tifa, and they are as likely to amiably ignore the heroes as they are to fight them if they're off the clock. It's all quite dark and bleak, really, because the Turks do some genuine fucking war crimes over the course of the game, like dropping the Sector 7 plate of Midgar on innocent civilians, and yet here they are, treating it like little more than another day on the job. And this is part of Final Fantasy VII's general critique of capitalism. The commission of atrocity is a 9-to-5 job you can have at a lot of corporations. And the horror is that you don't have to be a dead-eyed, soulless monster to do it. All you have to do is be willing to shrug your shoulders and say, it's a living. Reno and Rude are the most popular Turks and constitute a classic double act, big and strong and slim and wiry. Reno has big spiky anime hair, Rude is bald, Reno wears his suit loose and open, Rude is buttoned up, and so on. Elena, with her bright yellow hair and high energy, operates then as a contrast to those two more cynical veterans, and Zung, with his long hair and serious manner, is the perennial straight man of the group, the serious boss to this group of weirdos. They make for an effective group of minor antagonists. They are memorable and interesting and just a little bit sympathetic, showing glimmers of humanity underneath their dedication to working for the worst company on the planet. Scarlet in Final Fantasy VII is very little more than her mere archetype. She's the classic high-powered corporate sleazebag bastard model femme fatale, and following on from the way that Shinra is both based on the Japanese Zaibatsu, a vertically integrated corporate monopoly usually family-owned, it's also based on a Japanese conception of Western capitalist exploitation, and so Scarlet is blonde. She's dressed in a crimson dress with 5 miles of cleavage and heavily made up with earrings and jewelry. Her sexualization gestures at stereotypes of immodesty and garish feminine excess, which are, at their root, quite misogynistic, frankly, and the game's treatment of Scarlet as a character skews that way too. It is genuinely some of the most cringeworthy shit in the entire original game when it decides to have her confront Tifa, the highly trained martial artist, on the Junon canon, and then the game makes the two of them have a dueling slap fight, because that's how girls fight, I guess. Scarlet is loud, shrill, domineering, cruel, petty, and shallow, which, in fairness, makes her about as much of a caricature as her fellow executives Heidegger and Palmer. And the point, of course, is that this is the kind of personality that rises to the top in the structure of capitalist exploitation. If she had redeeming qualities, well, she wouldn't be a Shinra executive. Still, this is a pretty lazy kind of character. Scarlet's awfulness is specifically linked to her femininity, while Heidegger's and Palmer's caricatured awfulness isn't linked to their gender, and the way that Scarlet is portrayed is frankly just straight-up 90s-style misogyny. It just hasn't aged well. The remake games, stuck with the character, have tried to deal with this problem by basically ramping it up to the level of camp. They add truly cartoonish dimensions of sexual dominatrix dynamics on top of everything else, playing the archetype so much that it just doesn't register as anything to be taken remotely seriously. Your mileage may vary on how well you think that this works, and I personally just feel ambivalent. She's such a tired trope, played so straight with so little subversion or consideration or interest that I find her uninteresting as an antagonist. I can't summon the energy required to develop any kind of enmity. I don't know why exactly Heidegger from Final Fantasy VII is named after a German phenomenologist and philosopher whose work is famously high-minded and difficult to parse, but honestly, it might just be because the real-life Heidegger was a Nazi, and Heidegger in Final Fantasy VII is the jackbooted jackass who runs the Shinra army. The concept art shows him with the upright bearing of some 18th century Bismarckian German general, even if his chunky little in-game model can't quite carry that level of dignity for him, and as a personality in the game, he's a little more than a Shinra toady. He spends his time brown-nosing President Shinra at the start and then impotently raging about Rufus not respecting him in the later parts of the game, and much in the way that Scarlet and Palmer are little more than caricatured stereotypes of the worst kind of executive dipshit, Heidegger is shown to be a thin-skinned, self-important loser prone to violently lashing out at anyone below him in the power hierarchy. He's a man who uses bullying and violence as a substitute for charisma and leadership skills, and well, that's a fairly familiar archetype to the real world, isn't it? The remake games gentle him a little bit in that regard. He's presented visually and narratively less as a malicious, violent buffoon and more as a genuine, cunning threat, which, I mean, I guess it makes him a more credible antagonist to the party, at least at the start, but I also think it goes too far in softening the critique that his original version represented. Like Palmer and Scarlet, Heidegger is supposed to be a representation of just how vapid, arrogant, and stupid you have to be to become a top-level executive in a worldwide corporation. While the Shinra executive team are all losers and buffoons, a group of feckless, abusive dipshits of a severity that only unfettered capitalism can produce, none are more buffoonish than Palmer, the head of the Space and Aeronautics Division. He's presented as an out-and-out clown, childishly bouncing and jeering around a boardroom, and the one boss fight he has with the main characters ends with him slapping his own ass and running away, only to be unceremoniously run over by Truck-kun, which presumably sends him off to be the protagonist of the next season of Mushiko Tensei. You are not at any point in the game encouraged to take Palmer seriously at all, either as a character or as a threat. His entire function in the narrative is to showcase just what a bunch of total assholes the Shinra executive class are, and in fairness, it's a job he does do quite well. As a design, though, well, there is something slightly interesting about him, because he's basically another version of President Shinra himself. He wears brown rather than red, but he has that same old-timey style of double-breasted suit, and much the same portly capitalist fat cat physique. He is homoousian, thus made of the same stuff as President Shinra himself is, and in that way, he acts as a reminder that for all that the president talks and acts more seriously than Palmer does, they are ultimately just two colors of the same kind of clown. Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie are among the Final Fantasy VII characters to get greatly expanded in the remakes and later media, but in the original game, their purpose really is just to die. They are the other members of Avalanche, your companions on the first couple of missions to destroy the reactors. Cloud's first few interactions with them are hostile and standoffish, and he sees them as annoying, idealistic amateurs, but by the time they heroically sacrifice themselves trying to stop Shinra from dropping the Sector 7 plate, both Cloud and the player have an opportunity to think better of them. And you do. As character designs, they are a motley bunch, and very much on purpose. Biggs looks like he's cosplaying Rambo, Jessie wears a knight's breastplate, and Wedge is a chunky fat guy in a white shirt and jeans. And in this way, they are the perfect opposite of Shinra's endless parade of identical faceless goons. These people are individuals, and they are human, in opposition to conformity and machine reproduction. Their designs are personable, friendly, and ordinary. These are not undercover elite operatives. They aren't hyper-competent anime super teenagers. They aren't the main characters. They're just people. People risking their lives to try and save their planet and save their community. That's what makes their deaths tragic. That's what makes them heroes. Dyne is a classic kind of character, the dark mirror, the shadow. In this case, he's Barret's shadow, the ghost of what Barret might have become if he had given in to despair, and what he still could become if he loses sight of the future that he's fighting for in favor of single-minded revenge. Dyne and Barret's hometown was burned by Shinra, and as Barret desperately holds on to Dyne to save him from falling to his death, it is Shinra's bullets that rip through the arms of both men, severing their connection to one another and necessitating the prosthetic gun arms that both of them have grafted to their arms to pursue their revenge. But Barret rescues Marlene, Dyne's daughter, and because he has her to fight for, he starts Avalanche and sets out on a quest to save the world so that she can have a future. Dyne thinks Marlene is dead, and so he ends up at the bottom of the world, a nihilistic killer for hire who feels nothing except omnicidal hatred for everything, for everyone, and for himself. Barret has to overcome Dyne and what Dyne represents in order to hold on to what's truly important in his struggle. Thus, where Barret is broad, Dyne is slim. Where Barret is black, Dyne is white. And where Barret's gun is on his right, Dyne's is on his left. They are mirrors and reflections. Two men who could so easily have swapped places if only one thing had happened differently. Final Fantasy VII is, among other things, about violence and trauma and what it does to us and how we respond to it. Just like Cloud, Barret is shaped by the brutality that Shinra has done to him, and Dyne is a stark reminder that the only reason our heroes have escaped their traumas turning them into monsters is because the kindness of other people saved them from that darkness. Safer Sephiroth, or possibly Seraph Sephiroth, is the one-winged angel himself. Except you'd be forgiven for getting a bit confused by that, because clearly he has more than one. In fact, he has 7. 6 seraphic angel wings, and a 7th which is dark and corrupted. And it's not just dark and corrupted, it looks mutated and almost metallic at points, like some awful fusion of machine and disease. And so, there's a contrast there between the angelic and divine, which is how Sephiroth wants to see himself poisoned by Jenova's promises of godlike ascension, and against that, we have that artificial and unnatural, grafted onto Sephiroth prominently, literally replacing his own right hand. This reflects perhaps Sephiroth's own artificiality. He is not a true ancient or any kind of a natural being. He is a clone spliced together from his murdered mother, his murderous father, and an all-consuming parasite from the depths of space. Sephiroth's mental breakdown, the psychotic break that starts all of the plot of Final Fantasy VII, is triggered by an intense and overwhelming terror that he is a monster, like the other beasts that Hojo creates, that he's a thing which should not be and which cannot be loved. And it seems that even here, in his most powerful and ascendant form, he just can't get rid of the part of himself that thinks he is a monster. He just can't quite see himself fully as an untainted angel. The design of the one-winged angel, thus, can be read both as the ultimate expression of Sephiroth's world-consuming god complex, and the ultimate expression of the thing that he hates in himself the most, his greatest shame and weakness, which no amount of godlike power will ever help him to forget or to heal. This is the difference between him and Cloud. Cloud looked his own deepest self-hatred in the face with bravery and vulnerability and let other people help him. Sephiroth saw a monster in the mirror and took it out on everyone who he felt should be lesser than him.